This trial could take place on the moon, and nothing will change the fact that this man's DNA was found on a knife sheath recovered from the crime scene. Once the matriarch of a successful family in Florida, Donna Adelson will now be the latest in a series to stand trial for the murder of FSU law professor Dan Markel in an epic saga spanning a decade. Plus, Bryan Kohberger, accused of brutally stabbing 4 Idaho college students, will now be tried in a county 300 miles away after attorneys successfully argued that media coverage overwhelmed the small community where the murders took place. All this and more this week on Courtroom Confidential. Well, folks, it has been an extremely busy week in true crime, so much so that we decided to add some extra programming to this channel. If you haven't already, please check out the first episode in our Wednesday night live series, our midweek check-in to all things true crime. But in the meantime, let's jump right into the cases for this week. Florida matriarch Donna Adelson appeared in court Thursday for a final pretrial hearing ahead of her murder trial, which begins next week. Adelson is accused of conspiring with her son, Charlie Adelson, in the murder-for-hire plot that killed her ex-son-in-law, FSU law professor Dan Markel. Prior to addressing a series of pretrial motions, Judge Stephen Everett asked the prosecution whether they had extended a final plea offer. Assistant State Attorney Georgia Kappelman announced that the state is ready for trial and that they would not be offering Donna a plea agreement. Defense Attorney Dan Rashbaum also informed the judge that his client would not be making a counteroffer to the state. Donna herself then stood and verbally stated under oath that she did not wish to make a counteroffer. Attorneys for both sides then argued over the admissibility of evidence, including text messages between Donna Adelson and her son Charlie about news coverage of the case, as well as text messages between Donna Adelson and her daughter Wendy within hours of Charlie Adelson's conviction. Finally, Tallahassee Police Sergeant Chris Corbett testified regarding cell phone location data. The defense has objected to the admissibility of a 329-page PowerPoint demonstrative that the prosecution intends to use during Sergeant Corbett's testimony. Judge Everett ruled that it would be considered a demonstrative aid, not evidence, in the case. Lead prosecutor Georgia Kappelman estimates it would take 6 to 7 days to present the state's case. Potential jurors are expected to report Tuesday morning, September 17th, and attorneys estimate it could take 2 to 3 days to pick a jury in this case. All right, well, what's happening here? I can say my belief is that hands down, this is going to be the greatest test of the prosecution to date in this entire saga. Now, that does not mean that I do not believe they have a solid case. I do believe that they have a solid case. But we are now talking about an individual who is one more degree of separation removed from the killers in this case. Think about what the prosecution has to prove here, okay? They have to prove that Donna Adelson communicated with her son, Charlie Adelson, who then communicated with Catherine McBanois, who was Charlie's girlfriend at the time. And she was the one who then coordinated with Sigfredo Garcia, who was the eventual trigger man in this whole case. And then show that same train of individuals going back again, from Garcia to McBanois to Charlie to Donna. All of these communications, by the way, they have to prove to the jurors beyond a reasonable doubt dealt with the planning and murder of Dan Markel. That is just going to be a lot of water to carry. I'm sorry, but it is. This will end up being several trials within a trial, if you really think about it. Because first, they have to prove to this jury that Sigfredo Garcia committed the murder, that he's the one responsible for the murders to begin with. Then they have to convince a jury that McBanois coordinated with Sigfredo to plan that murder. Then they have to believe and prove that Charlie paid for that planning through McBanois to Garcia. And then they have to prove that Donna ordered all of it. In many respects, this is going to be very similar to a mafia case. And this is why mob bosses got away with it for so long, because they were able to put so many bodies, so many people in between them and the criminal acts that they were in fact ordering. as long as there's a train of people in between, and it makes it that much more difficult for the prosecution to prove that many different degrees of separation, that all of these people were conspiring, and in fact, this person at the fountainhead of all of it, in this case, Donna Adelson, is the one responsible. Again, that is no small task. That is no small undertaking. I think they have it. I think these prosecutors, if anybody, are up to task for it. I'm just saying that it is going to be the greatest test for the prosecution to date. And it's a circumstantial case. There is no direct evidence. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence, and I know that every single one of you who have been following this case closely are screaming in your heads right now, but what about the text messages? And what about the bump, the undercover operation? All of that, yes, good, but all still circumstantial evidence. Do I think it's convincing? Yes, I do. Will the jurors believe it's convincing? And they still have to show that all of Donna's knowledge about these murders occurred before the murders taking place. Remember, there's this whole defense theory out there that Charlie and Donna did not become aware, even that Catherine, according to Charlie, did not become aware of these horrible murders until after the fact, that they had anything to do with the Adelsons, that they were being extorted. So it's all this idea of a cover-up after the fact. Perhaps she's guilty, the defense might argue, of some sort of conspiracy to hide evidence after the fact, but she wasn't involved in the planning before the fact of the murders, which is what she's on trial for. That is the whole point of this, is that she knew about it and helped plan for it, and in fact, help pay for it. And they have to prove all of that. Remember, they do not gain the ground from the previous trials. Now, some evidence of convictions may come in. Obviously, we may hear some testimony from convicted individuals like we have before in Charlie's trial. But what I'm saying is that it is not as if this is the final building block and the jurors who are sitting here now have sat through the previous trials. They have not. They're not going to know anything about it. So all of that needs to still be proven to them to some extent, that this entire conspiracy took place through all of these moving parts, through all of those individuals, from Donna all the way down to Sigfredo, the triggerman, and all the way back up. And that's why at the end of this, I look at them saying 6 to 7 days, and I'm like, I don't know how you get all of that done. I feel like I could talk about it for 6 to 7 days myself. How are they going to prove all of that beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury? Again, I do not doubt these prosecutors. I think if anybody is up to this task, they are. They have certainly proven themselves. I do not doubt them for 1 minute. But this is going to be quite an undertaking. Well, what do you guys think? Am I overthinking this whole thing? Is this going to be, a cakewalk for these prosecutors at this point? Are they just going to hit replay on all of the evidence that they presented before, and they know exactly how this is all going to play out, and they don't expect any surprises this time around? Let me know what you think in the comments. The trial for University of Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger will no longer be held in the college town of Moscow, Idaho, where the killings took place in 2022, a judge has ruled. In a 20-page order filed in Leda County Court on September 6th, Judge John C. Judge granted a change of venue motion previously filed by Kohberger's defense attorneys. The judge based a large part of his ruling for holding the trial in another location on the close-knit community of Moscow, and possibly prejudicial media coverage, according to the filing. Considering the undisputed evidence presented by the defense, the extreme nature of the news coverage in this case, and the smaller population in Leda County, the defense has met the rather low standard of demonstrating a reasonable likelihood that prejudicial news coverage will compromise a fair trial in Leda County, the judge wrote in his ruling. Thus, the court will grant Kohberger's motion to change venue for presumed prejudice. Kohberger has been charged with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of felony burglary in connection with the November 13, 2022 stabbing deaths of Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. At the time of the slayings, Kohberger was a PhD student at Washington State University studying criminal justice and criminology. Washington State in Pullman, Washington, is approximately 8 miles away from the residence in Moscow where the 4 students were killed. In a one-page order issued Thursday morning, the Idaho Supreme Court assigned the case to Judge Stephen Hippler, who stands in Ada County, some 300 miles away from Moscow. The new venue is the same courtroom where Chad Daybell was found guilty earlier this year of killing his ex-wife and 2 children in 2019. Trial for Kohberger is expected to start in June 2025, where it is anticipated that the state will seek the death penalty. What's happening here? Well, this ruling went in great detail, several pages worth, going over the evidence presented by the defense to talk about how this small and close-knit community was so overwhelmed by the extensive and overbearing media coverage, and that they simply could not, or in fact, it should be presumed that there's a presumption of bias that hangs like a fog over that entire community. And I will say, given that it is a low standard, those are fine reasons. The standard is if the court is satisfied that a fair and impartial trial cannot be held in the county where the case is pending. Okay, that's a low standard. It gives a lot of deference to the judge. The judge cited some reasons from the community, some based on some expert testimony, based on some polling that was done, and based on the extensive media coverage. And as I was reading it, I'm thinking to myself, all of that makes sense. And yes, there's been a lot of media coverage, but there's a lot of media coverage in small communities, and we see this all over the place. I mean, think about the Murdaugh murders. Alec Murdaugh was, when they did a jury poll to begin with, in jury selection in that case, and they held that case in the same courthouse where his grandfather's portrait was on the wall. They had to remove the portrait from the wall for this man to be tried for murder of his wife and child in that courtroom. He was certainly a big part of that community, and it was a small community. And they asked the jurors, does anyone here know Alec Murdaugh? And I believe the testimony was, or the reports were, that everyone stood up. So it can happen. You can put on a trial in a small community that has an extensive amount of media coverage and still get, and I believe that happened in Murdaugh, get a fair and impartial jury. So, and I'm not saying that they could not have done a change of venue in the Murdaugh case too. It's up to the judge. There's a lot of discretion, and it's a low standard. So I'm not taking quarrel with the judge's reason here, or with the judge's decision, but I am taking a little bit of question towards why the actual reason was. I think the real reason is provided later in his ruling. Here's some excerpts. The Lake County Sheriff's Office simply lacks the number of officers needed to provide security for the trial. He then goes on to say, the county does not have enough court clerks to efficiently manage the jury selection process. And finally, the courthouse lacks the space needed by both the state and the defense. This is the real reason. This case is just too big of a bear for that county. They don't want to deal with it. I don't even think this judge wants to deal with it. And by the way, I don't have a problem with any of that. I think that's probably a smart move. This is going to be a monster of a case. There will be a tremendous amount of media coverage. It is going to be a logistic nightmare for whatever county, whether that's Ada County or Lake County or Los Angeles County. It's going to be a problem. No matter how used to handling big trials they might be, this is going to be a monster of a trial. So I don't have a problem with them just simply saying, here's a low threshold. There's some reasons. The defense has requested it. And let's go ahead and move it to somewhere where it's just going to be easier for everyone for this to be handled. The other reason I don't have a problem with this is a death penalty case. And that is probably why the prosecution should not have objected to this to begin with. In a case where you are potentially seeking the death penalty, these types of issues that don't really move the ball as far as guilt or innocence, go ahead and give that to the defense, because it eliminates one more issue that they're going to bring up on appeal. I say this all the time, but as a prosecutor, you're not just looking for a conviction. You're looking for a conviction that sticks. And a case where you're seeking the death penalty, this will have an automatic appeal. And they're going to be looking at it with a fine-tooth comb. And these little issues like change of venue could potentially be a problem down the road. So why not just give it to them? Why not just let them have this? It's not going to change things. And that's my last point. This isn't going to change a thing. This trial could take place on the moon, and nothing will change the fact that this man's DNA was found on a knife sheath recovered from the crime scene. This is a strong case. They have circumstantial evidence. They have cell phone tracking evidence. They have DNA evidence. If you've read the arrest affidavit in this case, they've done a tremendous amount of work, and I applaud it. And this case is not going to change to any great significance if you have to pick a jury out of the local community or out of a community 300 miles away. And by the way, I'm sure they've heard lots of reporting in Boise about this case anyways. So there you have it. But what do you guys think? Is this going to have a significant impact? I mean, jury selection, I always say, is probably the most important part of a trial. Do you think this really will have an impact on this case, or is this a case that is likely headed in the same direction anyways? Please let us know in the comments. Before we dive into the other cases making headlines this week, I ask only that you do this one small favor. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel now. We are continuing our efforts to provide you with more and more content and benefits, and it's through your support and subscriptions that we're able to make all of that possible, including our brand new membership program. So please follow the link in the description to see more of the details on that membership program. Also making headlines this week, former San Diego TikTok star Ali Abulaban will spend the rest of his life in prison for killing his estranged wife and her lover in October of 2021, a judge ruled Friday during a heated proceeding. Abulaban, age 32, who went by Jin Kid on social media, was sentenced to 2 consecutive prison sentences of 25 years to life without the possibility of parole for the murders of his wife, Anna Abulaban, age 28, and Rayburn Cardenas Barone, age 29, at the Spire San Diego luxury apartment complex in the East Village, which he admitted to during trial. During his sentencing, the crowd cheered, and Abulaban mockingly clapped in response. Abulaban gave a statement where he attributed his behavior in part to mental illness and drug abuse, and he continued to defend his actions as crimes of passion. The fact that I spent more time on the stand than the jury took to deliberate my fate is very concerning, he told the court. I don't know if he's really sorry, Judge Jeffrey Frazier said in response. I can't say that I think he's sorry for having killed those 2 innocent human beings. He will die in prison. Colorado dentist James Gregg, charged with killing his wife by poisoning her shakes, was back in court this week to face charges of a scheme to try and cover up the alleged murder. Shackled and handcuffed, his growing gray hair tied up in a ponytail above his orange jumpsuit, appeared in court Wednesday for a preliminary hearing on an amended perjury charge. During the hearing, prosecutors detailed a letter discovered in April 2023, just weeks after his arrest, that had been sent to a man who had briefly been incarcerated in the same wing of the detention center as Gregg. The letter outlined how Gregg would complete dental work for the inmate's mother in exchange for participation in a plan where the inmate would find an attractive woman to participate in a scheme seemingly designed to exonerate Gregg, instead indicating his murdered wife had somehow framed him. According to the convoluted plan, the woman was supposed to say she received a call from Gregg's wife saying that she caught James cheating again and that she was going to divorce him, and ask if the female would help frame James for an attempted homicide. Judge Shea Whitaker found on Wednesday that prosecutors had met the burden of proof and set an arraignment date on the amended perjury charge for October 15th. Gregg's murder trial is scheduled to begin on December 2nd. Disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, whose alleged sexual misconduct fueled the hashtag #MeToo movement, has been indicted on new charges by a New York City grand jury, announced during a court hearing Thursday. Earlier this month, a grand jury had been convened to hear from women who had come forward with new accusation against Weinstein, age 72. This new indictment is under seal with a trial date set for November 12th. Weinstein, who is recovering from emergency heart surgery earlier this week, did not appear in court. He could be arraigned as early as September 18th. Before we get to what's on the docket for next week, I want to take a moment to thank you all for your support. The love from our growing community has been absolutely amazing, but we wanted to take a moment to give a special shout out to DCG Smiley Face for their wonderful review on Apple Podcasts, and to our new members, Future ZX9TS and Robinhood_62 for their kind words on YouTube. Please keep them coming. We highly appreciate your feedback. On the docket for next week, Rankin County teenager Carly Gregg was denied a motion on Tuesday to transfer her case to youth court, which means that the 15-year-old will be tried as an adult for the murder of her mother and attempted murder of her stepfather when trial begins on September 16th. Former ballerina Ashley Benefield, convicted of manslaughter for killing her husband, will be back in court on September 16th to ask the court for a new trial, claiming that a juror illegally smuggled a phone into the deliberation room. Orange County Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Ferguson will be back in a Los Angeles court on September 20th for a pretrial hearing on murder charges for allegedly shooting and killing his wife during an argument in their Anaheim Hills home last August. Finally, as we discussed above, the murder trial of Donna Adelson will begin on Tuesday, with jury selection expected to last through the week. We will, of course, be covering the trial as much as we can, but in the meantime, this Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, join us for a live premiere of our latest episode, 5 Things You Need to Know About Donna Adelson. Whether you are a seasoned veteran to the case or a new follower wanting to catch up, join us in the chat as we dive into this epic true crime event. That is us for this week, folks. I am your host, Josh Ritter. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. Thank you again for joining me. Have a great weekend, and I will see you again next week for another episode of Courtroom Confidential.